All right, I'd like to go ahead and welcome everybody to this meeting of the Region 2000 Service Authority. Thank you all for joining us. Our first item of business is public comment. We have two folks who've indicated a desire to address the authority. So first up, Mr. Don Barnett. Hey, Don.
Oh, can you hear me?
Yes, sir.
Okay. So I was just reading through Mr. Gibson's letter to the Service Authority, subject future planning. My first comment is, it says that the static planning document was completed in 2016. And of course, there are three options explored: the waste energy, the region transfer station, and the expanding of Livestock Road onto adjacent property. And I'm assuming that's the Bennett farm that was purchased. So the first question is, since 2016, has any of this been readdressed to evaluate the changes in cost of service or benefit to ratio? And I'm not going to lie, I don't understand the concept between the benefit scores and the benefit ratios. But the one thing that I will say is, in every conversation that I've heard, there seems to be a general leaning toward always going to expanding. And I don't know if that's just the way the numbers play out, or if that's just basic math. So the first question is, has it been readdressed since the 2016? And then my comments would be, for those that feel that the landfill does not impact the residents of Campbell County, I will give you credit where credit is due. The odors have been greatly reduced. That's been a much improved part of living with the landfill, and we live with it every single day. But things like the trash along the roads, the wave patterns in the road from the trucks continually stopping at the turn lane there, coming toward Foster's into the landfill. But then just the general truck traffic noise in our neighborhood is the thing that hits us personally. And I know you've got signs and it's been greatly reduced, but you still have guys that are hitting their horns. They're still using their engine brakes. And just yesterday, there was an illustration that I hadn't even thought of, but I had a leak in my roof, and I finally got some folks out here to come repair it. And we were up there about 7 hours. And at some point during the day, one of the trucks came across the scale, or maybe they dropped one of the containers from the transfers there, and it made a loud bang. And the young guy of the two that was up there with me jumped, and the look on his face, I wasn't quite sure what was going on. But then thinking back, the conversation we had a couple hours before, he was a Marine and he was explosive ordnance disposal. And I think in his mind, it was an explosion, because he had one of those moments where he was shocked and stopped. And to me, it was just a regular background noise, but it's continual. It's every day. And it's a minor inconvenience. Most will argue, but it is an inconvenience. So those are my comments. And then of course the question goes back to, since 2016, have these numbers been revisited, and is there any change? Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Barnett. Appreciate you. All right, next up we have Mr. Hardy.
Thank you, Mr. Rogers. I appreciate the opportunity to address the board. Just a few minor concerns that I would share with the board. The documents for the agenda and the layout of materials for the public were not available until after business hours on Monday through the Services Authority website, or any way for the public to get that. I'd just like to humbly and respectfully request that just as you would for your own localities, that be available to the public the week prior to a meeting. That way the public knows what's on a meeting, has the opportunity to decide to attend or decide to question or decide to speak. So that is just something that I believe to be fundamental. I agree with many of Mr. Barnett's comments, just to, a few other the sound things in addition to large containers being dropped is at 7 o'clock every morning. My house, you'll wake up to reverse beeps every single morning. That occurs at 7 o'clock at home. So staff is working, no doubt, diligently, but there are impacts that extend. I live over a half a mile away. So when you are out there in a country type of setting, the noises and things like that do carry. So those are impacts. There are also impacts of, again, the vectors on neighboring properties at doing damage to roofs and gutters and things like that, that are byproducts of the landfill and living near one. So thank you.
Thank you. All right, that's the only folks I know of who wish to address us today. Anybody else? Anything else online? Okay, thank you all. All right, moving right along then, we're on to the minutes of our April 26th meeting. What's the pledge of the authority on that? A motion, is there a second?
Second.
Further discussion? If not, all in favor, please say aye. Aye. Any opposed? All right, thank you. All right, so next up, we have a public hearing for our tip fee increase. We've noticed and advertised a public hearing to increase our rate $4.25. And so is there any presentation from staff on this before we open the public hearing?
Just that we have proposed in our FY24 proposed budget the increase for the member rate and the market rate for $4.05. We will discuss that the proposed budget in more detail later in the meeting.
Thank you. Any questions, staff? All right, hearing none, we'll go ahead and open the public hearing. Note the time. Is there anyone here who'd like to address the authority with regard to the proposed rate increase? All right, seeing and hearing none, I'll go ahead and close the public hearing and turn it over to the authority for discussion and possible action.
Well, we have the year-to-date financials. If there are any questions on where we stand at this point, we'll be happy to try to answer those for you.
Is just on the process, is the process to adopt the rate when we adopt the budget, when we adopt the rate and then adopt the budget in separate.
I believe it's separate, two separate.
Well, the rate will inform the budget. So I propose we start there, right? They have the advertised rate. What's the thinking of the authority with regard to the proposed rate increase?
Move to adopt the increase.
And I'll second that. Discussion. All right. Go ahead and do roll call on this. All right. That
No. No.
yes. So the rate increase fails. All right. Takes us to the budget. The budget before us was written premised upon the rate increase.
That's correct. I'll just go over the summary real quick. The revenue projections for member tonnage is 70,910 tons. It's no change. Market rate revenue tonnage projection is 124,416 tons. Again, that's no change. we did have a bump in last year's budget. We increased the market rate tonnage only by 2% based on some pandemic spikes in tonnage. We're going back to more of a pre-pandemic tonnage rates. So I'm not recommending any change or any increase in tonnages for the market rate ton or the member tons. Member tonnage has been pretty steady throughout the years. Market rate tonnage does fluctuate some. Our revenue projection with the tipping fee increase is $7,982,907. That's 11.6% increase. That does include the 25% of the authority share, and according to our financial policies, of the airspace reserve. Our operating expenses are $6,738,747. That's a 14% increase over FY23. And our total expenses, which includes the airspace reserve expense, matches our revenue at $7,982,907. This budget does include a 7% salary increase proposed for July 1st. As we discussed earlier, the member rate is proposed to be $34.50 per ton. That's 14% increase over FY23, and the market rate is $44.50 per ton, which is a 10.56 increase over FY23. It's important to note that we have not increased the member or the market rate tipping fee for 6 previous budget years, and only 1 tipping fee increase in the last 10 years. The proposed increase in tipping fee is mainly to fund the livestock road closure and post-closure reserve contribution, and some overlapping debt service payments for phase 5 and phase 4, as well as some increases in operating expenses. Debt service for phase 4 will be retired after FY24, and then the funds made available from this debt service will be mainly placed in the livestock road closure and post-closure reserve. If you take a look at the pro forma that's included, we've got a projection on line 19 of closure and post-closure contributions throughout through FY29, which is when we're expected to reach capacity on the cell that was recently completed, which is our final permitted cell. If you add those numbers up and include the under protected FY24, we just had a plug-in number when this was updated in January, but we're actually in our budget, we've got $626,673 proposed in the FY24.
Contingent on the higher rate, right?
Contingent on the higher rate. If you add the projections up, you get a little over $13 million. Line 35 is, 36. We began paying an internal loan that we took out years ago to purchase the Bennett property. We borrowed money from ourselves to buy that 350 acres. We will begin repaying that internal loan in 2025. And that money was borrowed from closure post-closure reserve. So you add that up through 2029, you get about $1.6 million. We've got about a little over $3 million in cash reserves right now for closure and post-closure. And in a few weeks, you're going to be seeing this year's financial assurance letters that you receive every year, which has our closure and post-closure estimates for a livestock road. The DEQ each year will put out an inflation adjustment rate. This year it was 7.1%. So the closure, post-closure estimate will be, this year will be $16.3 million. So that's how much money in today's dollars we're estimating it will need to close the landfill in 2029 and to fund the 30-year post-closure period. If we follow the pro forma with this year's tipping fee increase and the projected tipping fee increases through 2029, which, as you see, it increases from $34 up to about $40 for the next 6 years. We will have accumulated about a little over $17.6 million, which covers our closure, post-closure estimate in today's dollars. Of course, this is the pro forma is a guidance document. We've had this since we started the authority. It's been very good, a very good, useful tool for us. But it is very important that we continue following these incremental increases through 2029 so that we will be able to fully fund closure and post-closure once we reach the permitted capacity.
Yeah, so as I understand that, every year we re-up our financial assurance and recalculate the projections. It's a bit of a moving target, but what we know now is it's just over $16 million, right?
Mhm.
And if we don't raise tip fees, we won't get there. And I think sort of one of the sticky wickets is this excess revenue conversation. But I believe that even if the Nelson and Appomattox argument prevails around those revenues, we still won't have enough to get to 16 million. We'll have to raise tip fees. And so it's a pay me now or pay me later. So what we do by not increasing tipping fees now is we press back the closure, post-closure expense that eventually comes to roost for all of us, right? Because presumably in our budget, when we don't do the tip fee increase, you're going to short the contribution of closure. Because operating, I didn't find anything in the operating budget to shave off.
Right.
So as long as we all understand what we're doing to ourselves and ultimately to our boards and their budgets in 2029, the risk is entirely our own. We're all going to have our percentage share of closure and post-closure costs at that time, because in the absence of tip fee increase, we won't have set enough money aside for it, even with all the excess revenues getting directed to it. And I don't anticipate that happening. So it would only get worse under that. So I'd say all that to offer. That's why I voted affirmatively for the tip fee increase. Staff made us aware of it in January. We put them off for a couple of years now. And at some point, we're going to recognize our percentage share of these costs. It's just the way the cookie's going to crumble. So I just want to be on record as that's my understanding from staff. I appreciate you clarifying it. I know the pro forma changes year over year. It's supposed to, because the financial assurances change year over year, 7% inflation. We'll do that to things. So with regard to the budget, as I said, I didn't see anything in there that I would recommend trimming. I never get to have that conversation, but I am concerned that we're not addressing a tip fee increase that ultimately will be required of us. I'd rather get on with it now than catch it later when it's a bigger number. So a moot point, since we didn't pass the rate increase, but I want to explain my rationale and document my concern.
Mr. Chairman,
Ma'am?
I thought at our last meeting, we were planning to align the employee increase with what the state is doing. You mentioned a 7. I've not heard the 7%.
No, I haven't either. I think there's still
Okay.
5, and I think what we did was put the extra 2% basically in a contingency line, so that the 7 comes through, it's there.
Okay, so by voting on the budget, we're voting on the 5, but if the state comes back to the table and says 7%, that's what we'll be addressing.
I would ask that that be clarified in the budget motion. That's what I would support.
Okay, and not that I'm saying that staff doesn't deserve it, because they certainly deserve it, but we had to make that difficult decision for our county employees, and we aligned with what the state was putting forward.
No, I think it's a good point. I think our budget adoption ought to specifically state that.
And you had mentioned the excess revenue. I think we could probably, what you said sounded good. I could say some things that's a little different from that,
Sure.
but it's no need in beating that horse anymore.
I agree.
You know, and so I would only support this budget knowing that no funds would be distributed in airspace reserve until the litigation is resolved.
Yeah, I am of similar mind. I think we got to carry our previous motions forward that says we're adopting a budget and basically spending closure, post-closure money because we're not directing excess revenue dollars to anything. That's compounded now by not raising the rate though. Because what that does, as I understand it, is it denies the authority their 25% share. And then they're also going to have to go into closure, post-closure for the difference between the $30 rate and the $34 rate, which is going to be what, a couple $100,000. So we're eroding our closure, post-closure at the same time we're locking up the excess revenues. So it's a double whammy.
And I think we need to realize too, that in that definition of excess revenue, there are certain categories that are covered with the excess revenue. If we need it for operations, then it would be distributed. So I don't think we've looked at that amount that we may need to help offset some of those expenses for operations.
Yeah, for us, it's true. I just think the number all in
I know,
doesn't get
that's
you
right.
there.
Yeah. And so I just wanted to put that on the record, as well as the formula that's been used in the past is not the $10 commercial rate. What I'm finding in Discovery is going back some years, it's been based on $11, 11 point something. And it's not been based on the $10, whereas that additional dollar could have remained with this authority and gone into post-closure. So I think we probably shot ourselves in the foot going back further than just this year. I would ask staff to give us those numbers if they have any tangible way of identifying that and letting us know years past, you know, has it been $11? Has it been $9? Has it been $10? Because I always thought it'd be a simple formula, tonnage times $10. Unfortunately, that's not been.
I agree. Alec brought that to
You know,
my attention,
yeah.
that it's been the difference between the commercial rate and cost of service, which moves year to year. And I think that's a well warranted look. My expectation was it was $10 between member rate.
I thought it
and
was a
commercial.
simple
Of
formula.
course, everything to do with that money is now contested, but yeah, I think it's a fair request of staff, absolutely. That they sort of take a look at what that should be.
Mr. Chairman.
Sure.
Would it be possible to potentially use some of the restricted O&M reserves to fund the closure, post-closure contribution for this fiscal year?
For the staff on that.
Yeah, we would just have to take a look back at our financial policies because it does address the O&M reserve in that policy, and you typically if that was money, you know, it's put in an account for operations and maintenance, not necessarily closure, but we would just have to review that and bring a recommendation to the board.
My understanding was it could be used for budget shortfalls.
Yes, yeah.
Mr. Chairman, may I, one more question. I made a note over here. So when in your presentation, Clark, you had mentioned the internal loan and then having a $3 million net reserve. Does that include the 1.6 or would be 3 plus 1.6 would be a total about 4 that's in the post-closure, would be in the post-closure?
Right now, we have separate from the internal loan repayment total, we have cash right now in reserve of a little over $3 million. So the internal loan repayment, the sum of that over the next several years would be additional to the $3 million cash that we have currently in reserve.
Okay.
And do we make the internal loan payment at the reduced rate?
That would have to be reviewed to determine, you know, where we would have to cut, how much of the future closure post-closure reserve contributions we have.
Because the internal loan is closure, post-closure, just by a different name.
That's true.
You know, we took it out, we got to put it back. So
That's true.
it's just a matter of how much you're funding closure, post-closure. We
Right.
call it the internal loan to remind ourselves
So
that
we've
the
already,
authority made a conscious decision, to take out a closure and post-closure, knowing in the future we would have to raise rates. to
That's
pay it
right.
back. So it's semantics at some
Yeah.
level. Internal loan is closure.
that's correct.
Yes, sir.
Apologies if the answer to this question is obvious to everyone who's been in the authority for longer, but just so I'm aware, the revenue increase in the proposed 24 budget is all related to the increase in the tipping fee.
That's correct, because we're not increasing our tonnage projections.
Got it, which is about 750,000.
Right.
Correct. And then, so you're somewhere at about $175,000, a dollar, roughly. So in the budget, the contribution to the closure post closure is 1.65 million. Is that correct? 24. I'm sorry, that's 25. That would be 100,000.
Yeah, roughly, yeah, no, $626,000, $673,000.
Where would I throw it in?
What's on your schedule too?
Schedule 2.
FY24 for-
Closure and post-closure reserve livestock road, FY24 proposed budget, $625,673.
Okay, so if we do not raise the tipping fee, we're contributing 625,000 post closure now. Tipping fee gets us $750,000. Then how do we make the budget work? Because if you lower the post closure contribution to 0 and we took out $750,000 in revenue, it's still have to record the shortfall.
That's correct.
So then where do we take does it come out of the O&M reserve?
That was one place that we could look at.
It's O and M or closure, post-closure. We're bleeding closure, post-closure without the rate increase.
That's right.
I mean,
So not only are we not contributing, we're actually.
you're taking away from it.
We'd be operating at a deficit.
Is that one of the categories that can be covered with excess revenue in the MOU? I think post-closure is one of the categories that excess revenue can be used.
Yeah, I think that would be at the discretion of the board.
Well, I think it's in the MOU.
Yeah.
Yeah. Right.
It's considered an operating expense, correct? Is that correct?
One of the categories in the operating.
Yeah, right.
So not to do that because I couldn't keep up with the math. What's the deficit? If with no, what's the operating deficit with no tipping fee increase?
Couple numbers.
Yeah, we've got some numbers.
So if we don't raise tipping fee as proposed, we spend all of the excess revenue to be collected in this fiscal year on operations, and we spend another $285,000 in reserve on operations.
285K is the
rate increase for us.
well, it's the operating deficit, right?
If we don't increase the tipping.
285,000.
Yes.
What's the cost of the 2% we have in the contingency? Is that somewhere?
$24,000.
And that's with benefits?
That shows up in the O&M expense.
Which is 24,000. Then you're down to 260 grand, right? What would the tipping fee increase be? What would the required tipping fee increase be to make the budget, operating budget work without a deficit? So roughly.
We've done just, I spoke with a little bit like, I can't speak, Rogers and Ms. McGarry, they voted for it. Then we had a slight error. So I told you all previously, it's 3130, it's 3171. So if we were to raise the tipping fee to 3171, we would not need that $285,000. You'd still need to spend $311,000 of excess revenue.
And
And we wouldn't fund the post-closure.
at 3171, you're not funding closure, post-closure. You're using 25% excess revenue, but you're not doing a larger draw off of closure, post-closure. Do I understand that correctly? So it's a hold harmless on closure, post-closure, but it's not doesn't. And if you're gonna raise the rate to 31.7, raise the rate. It's coming, it's coming.
Yeah, my concern is the longer we wait, I mean, everyone knows this, right? The longer we wait, the more we need. And no matter what we do, no matter how the legislation is settled, we're gonna need more.
The member use agreement was dated 2009, and it's a 50-year agreement, which it will be well beyond the life of the landfill. And if we don't have enough post-closure money, the agreement states that in your financial assurance letters that you see every year state that each locality will continue to be responsible for their share and portion of closure cost and the 30-year and the cost moving forward for the 30-year post-closure period.
Let's say we get to that point, and there's a sale of authority assets. Can funds generated from the sale of authority assets cover closure, post-closure?
Yes, they can. Of course,
We have
it's up.
35 million in assets right now.
Well,
roughly.
our assets are mostly landfill assets. We have some buildings, but it's all within the property of the landfill. There's a shop, there's an office building. We've got the Bennett property that is an asset. We would have to do an analysis and evaluation on, what that would look like.
My concern is we'll know that later. Right, as we're getting toward 2020, because you're gonna want real-time value.
That's right. Especially for,
Right.
Like the Bennett property.
Right, of the 35 million in assets is book value, right?
That's right.
Right, and the saleable asset that we would have worth,
Couple million, few million.
and of the increase, right? So if I'm looking at this correct, it's roughly $750,000 increase, something like that. Of the increase, the localities would pay like what, 275,000, and the commercial haulers would pay the rest.
Something like that, yeah. It's about 60-40.
So every dollar, so we're taking $400,000 in revenue that would go to post-closure that would have come from the commercial haulers. And we're essentially, depending on what happens in the future, we're taking on, the localities are taking ownership of that liability that would otherwise be funded by non-locality contributors, right? And the longer we wait, the more local money is required to meet our requirements.
I think Ambrose just did a rate increase with the $55.
On that.
So, I mean, we are recognizing significant advantage to regional partners, even at the increased rate. And I understand the increase is painful. There's a question about excess revenues, but I'm just persuaded that setting all that aside, suggesting it's all available to the authority, we still need to do something. And to your point, the sooner we do it, the better we all are collectively.
The sooner we do it, the less locality funds the post-closure.
And $34, $35 a ton is one of the lowest, at least publicly operated landfill tipping fees, in Virginia, if not probably the East Coast.
We were mid-60s and subset.
Yeah.
I don't really disagree with anything that's being said right now. But philosophically, I don't want to see a tipping fee increase until the excess revenue thing is resolved. And that's just how I feel about it.
I understand.
And then
It's just-
we can make up for it after that happens, however we need to do that. What, like it or not, that's just how
I appreciate it, yeah, okay. There's two ways excess revenue goes, right? It all goes to the authority, we need a rate increase. It gets divided, we need a bigger rate increase. You know, it's a rate increase, and I'd rather pick it up now.
Well, and I'll state, I would want it all to go to the authority, not to individual jurisdictions.
Right.
That's not what I'm saying.
No, I'm saying if the Campbell Lynchburg argument is persuasive to the court, we get a share.
Well, and I'm hopeful that, I don't know how soon it can be resolved, but hopefully sooner rather than later. So that's my gamble, that it'll be sooner rather than later.
Yeah, I guess that is.
Well, yeah, we keep,
The one thing I know from 10 years in budget is funding what's in the base is easy. Funding the increment's hard. And we're just making it so the increment, whenever this all gets settled, is going to be substantially higher than it would have been had we done an incremental. Which is just gonna be,
But you're still getting to the same end.
no, because we're foregoing revenue that would be in post-closure, which means the longer we wait to raise the rate, the higher we're gonna have to raise the rate.
You're not getting a piece of the $34 we charge every commercial hall. Lynchburg and Campbell did, helping pay for closure, post closure.
But you get this, you can get the $700,000 in additional revenue for 5 years, right? So basically the revenue, the 750,000 is 5 years, whatever it is. So you're at what, $4.25 million that we are collecting that could go to closure, post closure over the life of the landfill, because $750,000 a year for the next 5 years. That's money that we don't have to pay in a shorter period of time, over 4 years. If we raise it next year, it might be 6, I don't know. Over 3 years, if we raise it the year after that, we're just. Yeah.
We're kicking the can.
Well,
But you're also missing an opportunity on the front end, right? So. 'Cause even if you take it to the $34 and we're able to outrate it from there. Pick up that commercial hauler share of the $34 that goes to closure, post closure. And you start doing that now instead of in a year or two.
and understanding we all get the logic, right? I mean, it's I don't want to come back at $40 next year.
let me, Alex, how much is in that reserve supposedly that hasn't been distributed to any locality?
5.3.
$5.3 million
Stuff
is sitting on the table.
Got $2 million more like since then. Since the obligation was that.
What was the second number you said?
That more off the top of your head saying I can't remember the
Said 5.3.
excess revenue collected since September 21.
I've got it in my office.
If you could just send them out.
I think the other way to look at that, of course, is that's how much money.
Well, yeah.
I mean, the other,
Not,
the other. lens
Campbell
to see
more so
that
than Lynchburg.
certainly wants the policies in, so.
And, I think I can see why you would look at it differently too, because you think it's money owed to you. At the same time, you've not had to write a check to the authority. And your tipping fees cost about $90,000 a year, and you've gotten a check from the authority for $900,000. So
We pay tip.
we would see it from a little bit different.
I think the way I look at it is, the authority bought Campbell County's car and they financed it. And about 3 years in, they said, this car isn't worth what we paid for it. The gas prices are going up. We're going to take our car payment and start paying the increased gas. You didn't pay for the car. So now we're arguing over the value of the car. Should we have paid for the car? What was the car worth? How much growth did we put in the car? And ultimately, you just haven't paid for what you took. So that's the philosophical difference on the issue. And with the pro forma, pay Lynchburg, you pay Campbell, take on reasonable tip fee increases that Lynchburg and Campbell have to absorb as well. And you fund closure and post-closure, the operation, you pay for the car, right? So I think it can all seem really complicated, but it's just a matter of funding, paying for the asset.
Well, and it's not like a check wasn't stroked initially when we went to the dealership.
Well, and that's.
We bought the cars
The
on the
asset
lot.
was-
You put
Argument
money,
is the asset was paid
Right.
you put money down on the car, but
And
we've
now we
got any
put
number of consultants say it didn't fully fund that.
And I think, and there's probably as many consultants that say it did. So that's where we
I've
are.
seen those. Do you have those?
Well, see in court, right?
Oh, okay. If we can get to court, it mitigates a lot of this if we can get. It answers the outstanding question, but I dare say, in court, even if you prevail, we're gonna need a tip fee increase. And to Greg's point, if we're going a revenue opportunity right now, that you can't get back.
And there was never an agreement saying the authority would pay the money. It said they would vote annually. And that was my question 8 years ago is, if we owe money, why are we voting every year whether to pay it or not? Because if I buy a car, nobody tells me I may pay for it or I may not pay for it.
That's right. That language is the crux of the
Yeah,
challenge.
and
right?
that's the
And the
challenge.
folks who were there at the time, which of course you and I were not,
Right.
will tell you that that was in case there was an extreme emergency and those funds weren't able, so that it was collegial and the authority would have the resources. We're not there. We haven't been there. We can drive a crisis, but it's not real. And again, set it all aside, right? Because it's not germane to the budget today, because we're going to say we're not going to do anything with that money until the judge tells us what we're allowed to do with that money. So that's in a lockbox. The question is, are we doing anything else to generate revenue?
And quite frankly, setting all of that aside, I would rather other people, commercial haulers, pay a higher portion of the post-closure costs. And we're giving that up forever by not raising the rates.
Well, they have been paying more. The authorities just not seeing it.
It's not the increment. It's not the $10 difference. It's the fact that if there is an increase in the rate, everyone pays more. The money that they pay, the increase that they pay is money that authority can use for the post-closure expenses. We'll never get that money back, and it becomes my responsibility, Brad's responsibility, your guys' responsibility, of the localities, right? So we're giving up at a minimum $450,000 that none of us would have to pay.
Well, I think we've looked at options for that, but for various reasons, it hasn't been able to be approved through the zoning process, gas extraction, so I think the authority staff has worked diligently to try to look at ways to fill in that gap.
Which isn't the same as capturing as much as you can from the commercial haul. But it's another revenue stream. How I pointed out, we're entirely reliant on tip fees. But it's another land use impact to Campbell when we've not been able to work collegially on the one we've got. All right, so there's no tip fee increase. So now we've got a budget in front of us. Presumably, if we approve the budget, it will necessitate an amendment to a minimum, as I understand it, reduce the transfer to closure, post-closure, and to borrow sufficient from closure, post-closure to fund the operation for the year. Or I guess you mentioned O&M reserve, as another
Combination.
to borrow from reserves to make it whole. And then I think we've talked a couple of times about including the language that says the excess revenue money is not part of that until it's released by the courts. Yes, sir.
What would staff recommend the path to the community?
Throw it.
With no,
Thank you.
with no tipping fee increase? How would we fund it out?
Well, again, we would have to take it out of a reserve account to cover the deficit, operating deficit
Because you don't see any operating lines to be reduced, no expenditures to cut.
We haven't increased the tip fee in 6 years, and we've cut, the line items, year after year. And while also, working with, having to face the reality of the increasing costs, like personnel and fuel costs. So, there are very, very little room in the line items to make a significant impact.
Mr. Chairman,
Yes, ma'am.
you say we haven't increased tipping fees, but you also haven't increased revenue. Every year when we have a budget, revenue increases, expenses increase. So what do we need to do to try to increase that? Because the way it is, if we have overage, is that calculated into that formula? That's excess revenue that's distributed out that could be a part of this authority?
Well, then
It's like, the way I understand it, it has to do with cost of service. It has to do with what's left at the end of the operation.
How about cost of service?
Cost of service.
we have, at the beginning of each year, we just have a projected cost of service. And then as the year, as we move through the year, that actual year end cost of service, sometimes it might be a little bit more than we project, and sometimes it might be a little less. And that's where you get those differences in the market rate versus the cost of service. The $10 that we theoretically use versus the actual difference between market rate and commercial rate.
Who come up with that formula anyway?
Um,
I mean, when the MAU clearly states there's an extra $10 fee added to the commercial hauling. And if you take that times the tonnage, I mean, that should be a no-brainer. Why are we even worried about this $11, $9, whatever? But I know for the sake of everybody's time, we need to get into that. It just doesn't make sense. I have a hard time with that.
Well, what about, could you consider, I mean, it wouldn't make a huge dent, but bump up the member jurisdiction tonnage just a little bit. I mean, it looks like some of us may be going over at least in 23. I don't know what the pass looks like, which I talked to Alec about maybe getting those numbers going back some years, separating out the market tonnage versus the member tonnage, just looking at multiple years, where we only get the previous year and the next year on the budget printouts. And then if it doesn't look like it's happening, maybe we adjust from there during the year. I don't know.
Again, we take a pretty close look at those tonnage projections each year, and last year we did bump up the market rate 2%. We were having a little bit of a spike because of an unexpected spike due to the pandemic. We recently had to deal with, but it's settling back down now. So we were reluctant to try to increase any of the tonnage projections for this upcoming year. We can certainly take another look at it.
So, Chairman, Clark, would staff recommend using O&M reserve for the post-closure reserve first? Or
we would probably look at post-closure first. We've always tried to protect that O&M reserve for and if an issue came up that we needed that money to get quickly, we would have that O&M reserve.
What's the threshold in our financial policies? 90 days.
90 days.
What's that number? So the O&M reserve is insufficient to meet the metrics set forth in our financial policy.
So
So that's not 90 days worth at least.
Not if you count debt service. I guess that would be the rub. Do you count debt service in that calculation? Not.
Typically not.
No.
So what's the requirement without that service?
We're showing for our FY 24, we have $3.1 million debt service. And then we have about $3.5 million of operating expenses. We have about 1.1 in the O&M reserve at this time.
It's 90 days.
Yes, sir.
It's, divided by 365 times 9. $865,000. So we have 1.1. Yeah.
Just over the requirement.
Well, over by 250,000. Yeah. So I make a motion that we lower the salary increase to align with the state, so 5%, same as 20 grand. And we use $200,000 of O&M reserve, and what would we need then? $60,000 of post-closure to close the gap.
Which would also eliminate the transfer post-closure.
Yeah, this would just
Just
be
the balance after that.
I think those numbers.
Yeah, we'll double check all that.
65 times. So that we've
I
got,
think at this point, I mean, I know there's somebody's gonna second that, I don't know. I'm not. Or can talk about.
I'm wondering if we accept a friendly amendment to your motion to include our prior language that the 75% shown to Campbell and 25% shown to the authority to place in a separate account until such time as the actions are developed. So I'll second that motion as amended. Discussion.
I don't know that we necessarily need to govern how staff decides to operate with the budget. I feel like if we see in January, if we see an issue with the spending, then we would have to address it then. But I think it's a little premature for us to even tell staff how we're
We need
gonna.
balance.
Yeah, I think that sets forth a
balance.
balanced budget for us to adopt today, and then over the coming months, I think we need to be in discussion about the actual operationalizing of that. But we're just a couple of things from the.
Well, I think we still have that legal issue out there that's the interpretation of the original MOU. And that says excess revenue can be used for the budget, to fund the budget, if we have a gap. So I don't think we could close that opportunity to do that by adding that part to the that portion.
Yeah, my thought is that you just come back and amend the budget later to infuse it with those dollars.
That's why I would, well,
I think we got to thank.
I would just think-
not having. We don't plan accordingly. That that's what we.
I just don't want the language in there saying we're gonna put this aside with the fund, and then, you know, because that was our action. That was the board's action to do that, to pay it out, and, you know. I don't want that done.
Not entirely follow.
Well, I mean, you're pulling out of O&M, why don't we say take it out of, you know, something else? I mean, I understand where you're coming with O&M, but is it necessary to actually inject that language at this point?
You need the line items to be expenditures, revenues to be balanced. It's just saying which line item
Where to pull it from?
would be, yeah. So it's basically you take, so we're our financial policies is 90 days, $863,000. We have 1.1 million. If we use 200,000, we're still above our financial policy. So rather than take from the money from the annuity, I'd rather take money that exists above our financial policy goal to fund the operation of the budget.
And so you're talking about taking the contingency and the O&M to do that.
It would be like $200,000 out of the O&M, which would still keep us above our financial policies, and then 60 from closure post-closure, which would fund the rest of the gap. And then because you're already getting a $25,000-ish savings from going from 75, right?
I'm stepping through it a little differently, but you strike the transfer to closure to post-closure, you strike the extra 2% for the raise, you fill the balance with the overage in your O&M, and then the delta from that is taken out of closure to post-closure. Right. And all the excess revenue is sit in a pot for us to argue over, on a later date. Right? Yeah. So that's the motion on the floor. Is there any further discussion? Hearing none, we'll do a roll call vote. Ms. Adams?
And that's aligning with the same language in the past as far as.
I read it from the same
Okay.
email, and I think for the record, we should show our intent is expressly to align with our prior motion language. Is that fair?
Yep. That's it.
So your vote?
Yes.
I mean, yes.
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 All right. That's that.
Hey, budget.
All right, Clark, we're on to organizational reports.
Okay, director's report, odor complaints. We've had 2 odor complaints from one address since our April 26th board meeting.
I'd love it to be 0, but I do appreciate the effort to get it where it is. I know Mr. Barnett said as much as well. Thank you.
Here's our tonnage report. I'll do it sent out separately, but I do have paper copies.
Got it. Do you have one, Susan?
I've got one. Thank you.
Again, we showed the last 5 years side by side on each month of the revenue generating tonnage. You can see the spike in the last 2 years with the pandemic related issues. We've kind of started settling back down to pre-pandemic levels.
Any questions on the tonnage report?
Just a logistical one. Would it be hard to amend this report to show how much of each line is market tonnage and how much is member?
No, I can do that.
Maybe that would be the easiest way to show it all in
Yeah,
one.
to meet your
snapshot.
question earlier.
Right. Thank you.
11 by 7.
Yeah.
I can't read these numbers.
Let me ask you one question. How many years back would you like to see? I've got 5 years here. How many years? Is that sufficient, or would you like less or more?
I mean, sort of given the pandemic, maybe a few more back. We've been ready to think about that.
Yeah, I think it'll help sort of smooth that out.
Maybe 8 years or so.
Yeah.
10? Rounded to 10.
Clark, anything else on tonnage or any other questions? Yeah, okay. That gets us to the future planning report.
In the packet, we included a document to resume the discussion on our future planning options. It was mentioned earlier that we did a study back in 2016. We studied 3 different options. And the full report's on our website, and there was a matrix set up to measure the benefits and the costs. Of course, the costs were mainly dollars. Benefit score was based on public input. We had focus group meetings from all the communities involved. We had surveys that were sent out, and we collected all that data in a benefit type matrix that came up with these scores that you see. And the details of that report can be looked at online on our website. When we looked at all the costs, those were $2016, and the waste energy option was deemed at this point. At this point, it was deemed cost prohibitive for the authority. So we kind of decided not to do much more evaluation of that option. The 2 options that were the most viable for the future of post 2029 solid waste disposal in the region were the regional transfer station. And the other one was landfill expansion. We do have 350 some odd acres adjacent to the landfill that we did purchase many years ago. Not only for the potentially expanding landfill, but at the time we also needed soils for daily operating, intermediate cover, and also we needed soils that met a specification for the closure, the lining, subtitle D liners, and also the closure cap soils, which we found those soils, ample volumes of those soils on that site, which we've been using for the past several years on our most recently our phase 5 landfill construction project, and we've also used it on our phase 4 cell that we completed 4 or 5 years ago.
So sorry to interrupt, would you say the authority's got its return on investment for the purchase price of them based on the value of the soils?
Yes, and then some.
Okay.
Yeah, we actually looked at that a while back. I don't have the numbers in front of me, but yes, we have definitely saved at least the equivalent of the purchase price of the property in using that soils by avoiding finding that soil somewhere else in the county and having to haul it to the site. So yes, that has been definitely the major benefit of the Bennett property to date.
Right, if I remember right, that was the whole premise in going ahead with the purchase without knowing whether or not
That's true.
we could expand.
Yeah. And we did, before we purchased it, we did some geotechnical studies and soils borings and analysis, and we were able to identify several large pockets of the soils that met the specification for liners and landfill liner and cap. So that justified the original purchase of the property.
How many acres of that has been used for landfill cover?
We currently have probably used about 20 or 30 acres of that site. We've got 350 acres. The tract is bisected by a creek. The part of the property that's adjacent to the landfill is about 130 to 140 acres. The rest of it on the other side of the creek or the drainage divide would probably never be used by the authority for any purposes. But that property has shown to be quite valuable for operational purposes for the authority to this day.
And how is that?
Uh,
The other side of the creek that the authority could never use.
Well, it's not likely that we would ever use it, mainly because of that drainage divide. And there is roughly 120, 130 acres adjacent to the landfill that we are that's the side that we are using right now.
Okay.
With the transfer station, Clark, obviously, I'm assuming the cost takes into account the ultimate destination, right?
Yeah, we looked at that, and back in 2016, of course, I do recommend that we do update those numbers to today's dollars moving forward, which won't be a difficult task. But yes, that $61.76 a ton for transfer station operation took into account the debt service for construction, the operational costs, and the hauling and disposal costs.
What is the assumption for where the waste would ultimately end up? Is it?
At this point, when this study was developed, the several landfills within roughly 100 miles were looked at from the authority.
So that would be impacted very much by whatever the current typically deal we could arrive at.
Yeah, fuel costs have gone up, hauling costs have gone up, lots of factors have gone up. So I do recommend that we bring these numbers up to date.
Well, I think so I appreciate that, and I appreciate revisiting the study. You know, we don't do Q&A and public comment to answer Mr. Barnett's question. We have not updated these numbers since 2016. If we want to do this going forward, we probably should, but I guess, you know, why incur the expense of that if we're not going to be working regionally? And so my sense was that we needed to start getting our minds around closing it, right? Because there's no landfill expansion on the horizon. I think Lynchburg's pursuing a transfer station. Nelson has a transfer station. Appomattox has one coming up, and we're doing our own study about options for Campbell. So I think this is all good information to have, but it's sort of on a separate track from the position of Campbell and where we believe we are in terms of long-term life of the landfill, right?
Mm-hmm.
So I'm curious to know sort of annually what we're doing to wind down, because my understanding is, for example, in the last year, you can't take every kind of trash when you're topping off a landfill, right? So when do we collectively have to have our plans in place to start diverting some portion of our waste flow to another facility? And how are we each doing that individually? We need staff throughout closure, and then we need somebody to tend the facility even after closure. What does that look like? And how do we start scheduling that out so that we're all moving toward individual solutions informed by what's going to happen at the authority? It's an authority for 50 years. We maintain our obligation to it, our closure, post-closure, but we're all going to have to find our own solution. I'll be doing that concurrent with how we wind this down. So that's kind of where I'm at. I want to know 2 years out, what are the decision points in front of us? 3 years out, what are the decision points in front of us? Those are the targets I'm trying to be sure we do.
Yeah. Should the authority decide not to continue to operate regionally, you know, probably somewhere in 2026, we need to start thinking about the engineering and design of the closure cap. I would be careful about diverting waste. Because that will definitely have an impact on our earlier budget decisions.
It's the revenue. That's the sort of thing I'm talking about. But when you're up at the peak of the last cell of the landfill,
Yeah.
are you still taking everything? Are you just taking inert materials? Are you just taking commercial tonnage and residential going somewhere else? I don't know. But you're not going to get it all in there and then zip the thing closed like a suitcase for a trip, right? You're going to have to start measuring how much gets in there and how much time you've got.
Yeah, we could probably actually take most of the waste up to the day.
Right
that
up to the day.
Yeah, we did at Lynchburg. Because we basically faced the same thing at the Lynchburg Concord Turnpike landfill. You know, we took the same amount of waste the day that before we moved is the day that we actually moved to Campbell County. It was one day we were at Concord Turnpike on, you know, we did some good planning. And the next day we shifted all of our customers over to Livestock Road, and you know we did not have any diversions of any waste during that period leading up to the
I
close.
stand corrected. I recollected doing a little bit differently in Bedford. So good to know.
Yeah,
So that's what I'm looking at. So the options that were presented in 2016.
yeah, it does get tight up there,
Are
but
interesting.
yeah, we do you know have enough operating room left at the top to continue to landfill up until you know roughly the day or the week or so that we do realize well at some point we're gonna have to set a date. There's no doubt about that. So,
But you're looking at 2026.
if we decide not to continue to operate regionally, which I think a decision, whether we are going to do that or operate regionally, I think we really need to make that decision by the end of this calendar year. But if we decide not to operate regionally post 2029, I think, sometime probably early 2026, we need to start planning for the final closure cap.
Okay, so we got to decide if we want to stay together by Christmas. And then by 2026, we got to figure out how we break up.
Yeah, and
I would disagree with that.
In terms of what?
Well, I mean, because every time that a study is done, either the date moves out. I mean, we were 2032 and then we come back to 2029. I heard recently now it could be extended to 2030.
Well,
So that is an evolving number that I think it would be premature for us to say,
yeah, as you get closer to the closure date, that number becomes more accurate.
yeah,
When you're 20 years out, there's a lot of variables in those 20 years, but when you start getting 5, 6 years out, that number starts to tighten up and it becomes more accurate.
Right,
Instead of years off, you might be months off.
we may actually lose, market tonnage. I mean, who
That-
knows?
That's true.
That's what I'm
A
saying.
lot of things could happen.
And the main reason, I suggest that we try to make some kind of decision on the future by the end of this calendar year is, say if we do decide to continue operating regionally. I've included 2 schedules for what we think is the most viable option to continue to operate regionally. We've got enough time for both, either the expansion or the transfer station, but it's getting really, really tight. The schedule's getting really, really tight.
Are you saying 2023 or 2026 make a decision?
I'm saying that if we decide to operate either way, I mean, if we decide not to continue to operate regionally, or if we decide on one of these options, either one of those decisions is really dependent on the other and these schedules is that we really need to make a decision to move whether we're going to operate regionally or not by the end of this year. And if we decide not to operate regionally, then we just continue operating the landfill, and then sometime in early 2026, we begin the process of designing and engineering the closure cap so that we can start closure in a timely manner after we actually reach permitted capacity.
Have we totally dismissed the opportunity to possibly expand on another piece of property in the region? Or
We kind of looked at that. We kind of looked at that option several years ago, and it's permitting another landfill cell in Virginia right now from just a greenfield site is probably not a viable for this area.
So that's a different process than just expanding onto.
Yeah, that could take 10, 20 years.
Okay.
There's a private landfill trying to be developed in central Virginia right now, and they've been proposing this landfill for at least 5, 6, 7 years now, and I don't think they're really that close to getting it started at this point. But yeah, it's becoming increasingly difficult to site a landfill from a greenfield site, not only in Virginia, but in all up and down the East Coast and beyond.
I don't think I'll be voting whether to maintain the regional relationship or not in 23. I'll go ahead and put that on the record,
Well, if we don't make some decision,
because I think a lot of things are to happen.
yeah,
Just don't have time to do anything else if we don't know. by
Yeah.
then.
Well,
if you don't know
why
in
are we just told this? I mean, here it is halfway through 23, and now we're told in December we've got to make a decision.
well, we've been discussing this off and on since our report in 2016, and here we are.
It may be dependent on what the option is for us, because obviously if we have a transfer station, probably wouldn't continue a regional partnership if the alternative was a transfer station. That's hard to make that decision without knowing what the options could be.
I think a transfer station will require a special use permit in Campbell. And so figuring out what Campbell wants to do would be paramount to the region even having that option in Campbell at its current facility. So gonna be a bunch of hoops to go through to figure out what we would do.
Well, I
But
agree,
it
we should
looks to
invest,
me like, everybody's fine with it.
we should be investing money on property that we don't even know could be rezoned anyways.
Why I wanted staff to put something in the packet so that we can all collectively get our wheels turning. So, that's, I think really all of you guys have a solution. Campbell still figuring it out. So, all right, Clark, anything else on that?
No.
Anybody else have any questions for Clark on that? Okay, let's get this to election of officers, right? Alex, this is just our annual effort to name a chair and vice chair and treasurer. Is that correct?
I want to state that, that it's open process of nominations. There's a desire to rotate the officers that the end of the fiscal year is the time to decide.
So if we do nothing, it continues like as is.
Sorry.
And then how that work?
Yeah, I'm happy to yield the chair if anybody else wants it. But happy to continue to do it if everybody's
I
satisfied. Stay the course, your treasurer, Susan. You're good there.
Yeah, let somebody else want.
Like the vice chair.
Let's be vice chair. If we're still there.
I think Greg's raising his hand.
So I'm happy to be vice chair as I get my sea legs.
So in
Frank, if you're looking.
a
for,
supreme act of narcissism, I will nominate myself for chair, you for vice chair, and Susan for treasurer.
I will second. that.
All right, assuming there's no further discussion, all in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? All right,
Congratulations.
yeah, more of this. All right, so with all that being said, I'll entertain a motion to adjourn.
So moved.
Second,
Second.
all in favor, aye.
Aye.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Right, correct. 10 minutes.